It's been almost 2 decades since we started our journey to educate and help you take action so you may better manage your financial future. Our goal is to help you accomplish your life's purpose. This podcast reveals financial tips, strategies, and insights that will help you to set your financial goals and guide you along the way. This is Managing Your Financial Future, brought to you by the advisors at Lucia Capital Group. We are managing your financial future. Thank you. Welcome back. Another episode. Johnny Dean, your podcast host, not your financial advisor, but here with my favorite financial advisor of all time, Professor Rick Plum.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Only because I've known you for so long, and, we hang out a lot together. We are back for episode number 127. I was just told 127 episodes over how many years, and that's just the podcast. That doesn't count all the years of radio and television. So
we did a lot of that.
We did a lot of that, and a lot of different subjects come up, and sometimes subjects beget other subjects, and that's exactly what is going on for this particular episode. Now, last week, if you follow these week by week, you'll remember that we talked about why guaranteed income is so important in retirement. It acts as a foundation. Things like Social Security, if you have any pensions. I think we talked about maybe annuities if people want to get into those. And they're not for everybody, but in some situations they can work. Now, I have to crane my neck here, but I ran across an article that illustrates this just a little bit. And it's that LIMRA, they used to be a life insurance marketing research, but so they, you have to sometimes wonder where these things come from. But they surveyed, I don't know how many, quite a few households. It doesn't say how many, but they said an overwhelming majority of U.S. households with $2 million or more in investable assets are confident they won't run out of savings if they live to be age 90. Now, $2 million.
Okay, that's not the average household.
No. In fact, less than 7% of those households headed by somebody over age 60 have $2 million. So that's not most people. And they found that if you had between $1 million and $2 million...
That's still not the average household, but I mean, it's got a bigger
It's
percentage.
It's closer. Only 28% strongly agreed that they would have enough money to live through retirement. And if you got down to folks with only $100,000 to $250,000 in investable assets, only 12% strongly agreed that their savings and investments will not run out if they live to be 90 years old. So there could be a couple of things going on there. One could be that they're overconfident and they don't really understand how much they need for retirement, or they work with somebody who has found a way to get them through retirement on whatever salary, or not salary, but on whatever income they do have.
And when you have $1 million plus or up to $2 million or more, you probably are working with some type of an advisor, have probably done some kinds of projections, looking into what is reasonable, what am I expecting? Yeah. You tend to be, if you've got that size portfolio, you tend to be somebody who's paid attention a little bit. Either you inherited it, which means you probably don't know what's going on, or you saved it over the years of working, which means you watched and you budgeted and you saved and you did things.
Yeah, you hope.
That's how you created that nest egg. And so, but a lot of it comes down to the relationship between the asset value that you have today and how much you were earning while you were working. Unfortunately, I've seen people that have $1 million, $2 million, but they were making $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 a year, and they only have $1 million saved up at retirement.
In other words, they're spending outpaced,
$500,000, $400,000 a year. So either they're going to take a dramatic haircut at retirement, or I don't know what's going to happen to them.
Well, it's not uncommon. In a situation like that, somebody with guaranteed income like Social Security, I don't know about pensions or anything like that, but it's not going to be enough to cover their shortfall.
Right. And we're on the other side, I've seen people that don't make six figures, but have $1 million, $2 million of investable assets because they're living on $60,000, $70,000 a year. Yeah. And if they're living on $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year, and they've got $2 million in the bank, and they're going to have Social Security, they should be confident.
Yeah. So
it has a lot to do with what is your spending habit? I know people who are very comfortable with $300,000 in investable assets, their Social Security, maybe a small pension, and what that provides in a realistic environment. And I've met people who have $5, $8, $10 million who are broke in relation to what they spend.
In other words, they're spending
they're
everything
spending everything they get.
Well, so that begs the question then. Well, here, before I get to that question, this is what leads into it. We mentioned this last week, where we said, okay, your strategy starts at the foundation, which is the guaranteed income, Social Security, and things like that. Things that are coming in no matter what you do, no matter what the market does. That's kind of how we define that. And anything beyond that you need to cover your expenses, whether they're necessary expenses or they're just I want to do it expenses, has to be taken care of by your portfolio, your savings, your nest egg. So then the question comes up, well, I need a certain amount from my portfolio every month, every quarter, whatever it is. How do I know how much I can withdraw? What, in other words, how much should
reasonable?
How much should you withdraw from your portfolio? Is there a safe amount? Because if I have, $1 million socked away, I mean, I feel rich. Maybe I inherited it, and I've never had that before.
That's the worst one.
Can I take $100,000 a year?
You can.
Okay,
not for 30 years.
Well, exactly. So we know that there's a time factor involved. I mean, if you have $1 million and you want to take $100,000 a year and you're 94,
hey, fine.
I wouldn't be too worried. Although you could live to be 110, but odds are against you.
If you're taking out $100,000 a year on top of your Social Security and spending it at 99 or 95, whatever you said, you're not living 10 years.
No, you're probably not, because whatever
high.
it is,
you're pushing that candle.
You're
burning that candle down.
It probably has
fast.
to do with very expensive champagne and cigars and who knows what else. You can take it from there. You're right. Okay, so that's the question, though, and that's what we want to talk about today is
and
how
I think
much
the safe withdrawal rate changes based on how old you are and other factors, health is being one.
Yeah, so let's run down these things. I've heard, and many of our listeners have too, about this old 4% rule that you take how much you have in your portfolio and you multiply it by a factor of 4%, if I said that correctly. So if you have $1 million, just for easy math,
$40,000 a year.
$40,000 a year
plus inflation, according to the supposed rule.
Well, in other words, you can give yourself a bump of
whatever inflation is,
1 or 2% per year.
The testing that was done on these types of distributions, Monte Carlo simulations, were historical inflation. So it's not just a flat number each year; it's a random number based on historical numbers.
Average, though, I would say is whatever. Okay, but they ran these simulations and they found way back in the early 90s that 4% would give you a reasonable amount of confidence based on all these historical numbers that
your portfolio would last for 30 years.
30 years. So we'll say age 65 to 95, 60 to 90, pick a year. All right. So does that still hold true? And we don't like rules of thumb, and that is one of the big ones.
They don't call it a rule of thumb. They call it a rule. And
that's true.
To me, it's a guideline. It's a great place to, from a high level planning standpoint, but it also, again, depends on the age of the individual. We're talking about a 65-year-old and 30 years. What if you're 55 and you want to retire? You're going to say, well, I'm going to pass away at 85. You're going to guarantee that? Because that's, 30 years.
So what's wrong with if somebody wanted to start with how much can I withdraw from my portfolio and say, well, I'm going to take 4% of whatever the balance is at the end of the year. What's wrong with that? What could go wrong with that?
Well, there's nothing wrong from the planning stages. When you're looking at it first blush and you're saying, you know what, I want to retire at 65. Let's assume that we're going to take our Social Security at that point, and we'll 4%, from the portfolio, that brings me up to X amount of dollars per year. Can I afford to live on that? And then, but one of the expenses you don't know is taxes, so you got to play with that a little bit. And so it gives you a ballpark idea. But if you're short, you say, well, I need 100, and that's only giving me 80. Now, what's the distribution rate that gets you to the 100? Is that a 5% or 6%, depending upon how much Social Security you have? It could be a bigger number. How do we get to the right number? And is it too much? Now you look for reasons why the income may drop in the future. I have my mortgage will be, I got my mortgage going into retirement. I'll have that for another 10 years. But then 10 years from now, it drops off because I paid off the house. And so my income need at that point drops. So I like looking at the projections of, is 4% a reasonable starting point? Mm-hmm. And then you layer in the complexities of what may change in the future.
So you like 4% as a starting point.
It's a starting point. It's a guideline. But you also look at, maybe I want to retire at 65, but I don't want to start my Social Security until I'm 70. Or I'll start my spouse's Social Security at that point, but I don't want to start mine until 70. And then when I start mine at 70, it's like, almost $50,000 a year. That means, am I going to live on 4% now? I've got $1 million portfolio. I can only take 40,000 out, but in 5 years, my Social Security is going to be 50,000. Now I'm not going to touch my portfolio.
So my portfolio doesn't have to supply nearly.
Anything. So
as
reality
much.
is, I should be able to take out more than just the 40,000 because I'm going to take out less later on. Those are the complexities of using just a straight 4% rule. But assuming I'm retired, I've started my Social Security already. My pensions, if I have any, have already started. Everything is already on.
all the income, the guaranteed income is
my
ready
home
to
is
come in.
paid off. I don't have any big bills that are going to stop being bills in the not too distant future. Now we're looking at, is 4% reason? Yeah, let's see if 4% can work. So can you make it on what 4% provides? Now it's about how do you allocate the portfolio, but it's a great starting point. But most people aren't in that position. They've got incomes starting at different ages, expenses going away at different times, maybe expenses increasing at different times.
Well, and as we talked about last time, we said that the expenses go down in retirement as you age. Maybe not between 65 and 75.
Well, the first several years, maybe the first decade of retirement, your income will typically rise with inflation, maybe a little more, because you're enjoying, you're healthy, you're doing things, you're finding new things to do. I can't tell you how many times I've had people tell me, I don't know where I found the time to work.
Right.
I'm so busy now.
Well, that's a good retirement, I would say.
And then as you get into your later 70s, your mid 70s, later 70s, maybe you're slowing down a little bit. Get into your 80s, you're slowing down quite a bit as far as spending. I'm not necessarily talking about, whether you're still running or doing physically fast, but your spending typically goes down.
Well, the expensive things start to go away, and for retirees, expensive things tend to be things like vacations and
you don't travel quite as much. You don't eat as much. You don't go out as much.
Yeah.
You're not shopping you're not going to Nordstrom's as much.
Now, healthcare is an expense, though, that we haven't talked about.
And other than somebody who's chronic, healthcare usually shows its really ugly, expensive head in the last years of life. And
last couple of years.
And that can be an issue. But it typically, like I said, is not a big number every year. I mean, they talk about it's going to cost you $300,000, $400,000 for healthcare over your lifetime. Well, the good news there is it happens in the last couple of years for most people.
That's the trend. So 4%.
But who knows?
4%, just to keep it on topic, a 4% rate of withdrawal has its advantages.
For a 65-year-old is a good overall high-level starting point.
Yeah. Now,
for a 55-year-old that's healthy, I probably wouldn't want to do 4. For a 75-year-old, I wouldn't have a problem going higher. So because
it's about time.
It's about how much time you need the portfolio to continue.
Yeah, we talked before, and this was back when interest rates were at 0, and they were for quite a long time, or close to it. And some of the people who had originally come up with this whole 4% rule were saying, no, that's still too rich.
I don't think it was the original person, Dr. Benjamin. I don't think readjusted that. But some of the people that have analyzed it outside of him are saying, especially when interest rates a couple of years ago were in the zeros, maybe the safe withdrawal rate would be 2.8%. Because back when it was originally done in the mid to late 90s, interest rates were a lot higher. Everything was working differently. Mm-hmm. The market's different than it was. Interest rates being as low as they are, we're not getting the. Now we've got a little bit of interest rate behind us again. But even today, or as recently, the College of Financial Planning is saying 4% may be a little high.
Is there a big difference between a 4% withdrawal and a 5% withdrawal, other than the 1%? Does that make a big difference? I'm asking for a reason.
On longevity? Yeah, it has a big difference on longevity.
Well, and not just on longevity, but also on this whole idea of sequence of returns, which I didn't really plan on getting into, but it plays into this whole idea of how much can I take from my portfolio. Because Professor Plum, you and I both know, let's say you decided to take 5% at age 60 or 65. I can't remember what this...
Pick your number.
We'll say 65. And you decide 5%.
Right. So out of that million, you're going to take 50,000 instead of 40,000.
Oh, okay. So, so that's not unreasonable, correct? I mean, necessarily.
No, but you understand that you are putting more stress on the portfolio, and that at some point you may have to slow down on your spending. Maybe, and when I say slow down, it means not as much inflation factor. It has to, you'll keep it flat for a while. 5%. A lot of this has to do with the increase over time with inflation. a 5% flat with no increases for inflation
That's what I'm talking
is
about.
probably equal to or more viable than a 4% plus inflation over time.
Well, I would hope so, because as you get 4%, you're...
I mean, 5% is 25% more than 4%.
Here, it's true. When you deal with percentages, it's really an odd thing.
When you throw percentages on percentages?
Well, no, it is. It is. You know, you hear, oh, I found the people taking this medicine, the rate of death shot up 25%, you know, when they used it. But it turns out it was a 1% chance with it, and now it's only 1.25% chance. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Where I'm going with this is 5% could be okay if you don't take any adjustments for inflation. But here's the other thing that you got to be concerned about. We've run these, we've talked about this many times. Somebody who took a 5% withdrawal rate out of just a systematic withdrawal rate.
Right.
But they happened to retire at a time.
At the wrong time?
When when stocks were flat or going negative for the first few years of their retirement. Now you ask, is a 5%, and I don't care if it's 4 or 5. I'll say 5 because that's what we used at that time. Is a 5% rate of withdrawal for your for the longevity? Can you make it 30 years? Now your answer was it can be, but we've seen instances, Professor Plum, where just doing a systematic withdrawal of 5% every single year and then rebalancing can actually run them out of money well before 30 years.
Well, that's one of the reasons I said from a high level standpoint, using a 4% or 5%, they're great for getting a very high level look at things. But where it really comes down, where the rubber meets the road, is when you get into the allocation. You know, you were talking, I think, or maybe you're remembering a study that John Hancock did.
It's exactly the one I'm referring to.
From several years back, where somebody retired in 1969 and took a flat 5% off of a balanced portfolio that was rebalanced annually to maintain its balance. And the person, and then they did the exact same strategy, 5%, no inflation, starting with $100,000 in 1969. And then somebody did the exact same thing with the exact same type of portfolio in 1979.
Started 10 years later.
Right,
now,
just 10 years. So the only thing that was different was the time horizon.
But they both took a 5% rate of withdrawal from their portfolio.
Yeah. You know, off their $100,000. The person that started in 1969 was out of money in 20 years. It didn't last.
I think it was even 18.8 years or something. It didn't even last.
They were gone.
Yeah, it was out.
The person that retired 10 years later and did the exact same thing had like $500,000 20 years later.
Right.
The difference being in the first 10 years of 1969 to 1978, there were 3 or 4 negative return years. And then in the first 10 years of the individual who retired in 1979, there were no negative years. Right. And so that says, well, if you just look at that, you say, well, then 5% doesn't work. It doesn't work all the time. Can't work. Don't do that. That's even a balanced portfolio stinks. And so it
depends on whom you ask. If I asked the person who retired in 1969, they'd say absolutely 5% was too rich. There's no way I could have survived. But you ask the person who retired in 1979, they said, heck yeah, 5%, I probably could have taken more. I mean, I've got more money than I know what to do with.
And if you're asking somebody in 1989 or 1999, you don't know the difference.
Exactly.
Because they were very different decades. And, the first 10 years, 89 to 99 were pretty good years. 99 to 2009, not so much.
No, and so you run into that same problem.
So that sequence, but now what that's just looking at the rule, so to speak, but not at how you actually structure a portfolio.
Right.
So if you took that $100,000 in 1969 and you did a very basic bucket strategy, and you said, I'm going to take that $100,000 that is currently invested 100% in a balanced portfolio, which was 50% stocks, 50% bonds. We can get the study and give you more intricate details, but and rebalanced every year after taking the distribution. You took half of the money and put it in your mattress.
So $50,000 of your $100,000 back in 1969, and you stuck it in a secure mattress. Let's call it.
Yeah, and you took out $5,000 a year
out of the mattress.
And you left the $50,000 in the portfolio, and you did not take any distributions from the portfolio. Then at the end of 10 years, when your mattress is empty, you pulled $50,000 out of the portfolio and did it again for another 10 years. What would your portfolio have been worth at the end of 20 years using the exact same portfolio, but arguably in a much more conservative manner? You got half the money in cash.
Yep.
You'd still have over $100,000 left after 20 years.
Whereas in the other way, you're out of money.
Yeah. Same, portfolio, different strategy, same distribution rate, same dollar amounts, everything there. The only difference was you didn't sell anything when it was down. And those down years had time to recover, and you recovered nicely. And so what would you mean? In that case, it wasn't the withdrawal rate that was the problem. It was the underlying investment strategy that was the problem. But obviously, that has to come at a cost.
It wasn't the withdrawal rate, it was the withdrawal strategy.
Yes. I'm sorry.
And it does come with a cost. Well, that's what you said.
It does come with a cost. So I looked at the same thing, doing the exact same thing for somebody who retired in 1979.
Yeah, and my first guess was, I said, well, heck, since we're taking half of the money to begin with out of the markets, it's going in the mattress.
Right.
From 1979 to 1989. I mean, we had a pretty good 10 years, after about 1982 or so. I mean, heck, they're going to miss out on a lot of gains. So
right.
I got to think that after 10 years or 20 years.
Well, I looked at it after 30 years.
Okay, I would think my thought was after 30 years, the person with that stuck it in the half in the mattress to begin with, like a quasi bucket strategy,
right.
Had to have been doing significantly worse than the person who just let it all ride. And what were the results?
Well, I'll let you decide on what significantly worse means. The person who did it all in the portfolio had about $600,000 in the portfolio after 30 years.
After 30 years.
The person who did the more conservative approach, it did cost them. They were down around 500,000. Not down 500. They had about 500,000 in the portfolio after 30 years. So it cost them $100,000, or it cost their heirs $100,000
after 30 years.
They had at that point.
But the point was that they still had more than enough. They were still taking their 5% out every single year.
And this leads to one other aspect of why was the difference not as great as we would have expected?
Yeah,
because
why?
if we look at the time horizons and we look at historical needs, 2020 we're using historical values. The person retired in 1979. So the first 20 years takes them to 1999. And that was at the end of 20 years, they pulled money out of the portfolio to give their next 10 years worth of income.
But
and what happened from 99 to 2000, the market didn't do much. But they didn't lose anything. They didn't subject themselves to that negative sequence of returns that happened because they let the money recover from 99 to 2009. So it didn't affect them so much. Whereas the person that was all in the market, they were pulling it out when the market was down. And so sequence of returns matters. Value averaging matters. The appropriate strategy for withdrawal matters. And from a high level, the distribution rate does matter. I remember years ago on the radio, we got a call from somebody who said they wanted $30,000 a year. They were like 60, 61, and they had $300,000.
10% is what they want.
And how do you get that? You don't make that happen. I mean, that's not going to last for more than 12 or 13, 14 years. Even if with good results, because you're drawing it down so fast. And they didn't like my answer on the air. I remember they weren't very happy.
No,
but it's just, there are certain things that you can't wave a magic wand and create impossible type returns.
But there are.
But you can look at 4 or 5, depending upon what's happening in your life, what your structure. Some people want more money in the early years of retirement than later years. They're willing to say, I don't want as much inflation because I want to be able to travel now while I'm young enough and healthy enough to do it. And, but then when I get older, I don't necessarily, everybody all know that my parents, they don't do it travel as much because they just don't feel like it.
Well, what about somebody with $1 million and they start taking, let's say, 10% out the first year?
Okay.
We'll say it's a 10%, but they're going to slowly decrease it over time. Does that ever work?
I've heard people talk about it. A planned decrease, unless you have, I know somebody who has a fairly expensive hobby and they expect this hobby to continue for the next 10 years. And then after 10 years, they're saying, after that, I'm just not going to do it anymore. The hobby is not one that you do into old age, physically.
Must be a hobby similar to yours.
Not necessarily, but
okay.
Everything has its risk and reward.
Yeah, of course.
And so the expenses are going to drop 10 years from now. So that is a planned. He goes, I don't know if I'm going to continue it for 10 years, but it may be 11, maybe 9, but we have to plan on something.
So when you talk about a safe withdrawal rate again, 4 or 5% is probably okay, but you have to have the right strategy, the right withdrawal strategy. Now, if somebody wanted to take more, and you brought this up earlier, but I think it's worth repeating, I want to take more out now because I'm 65, but in 7 years, my mortgage will be paid off.
Right.
So I'm picking up an extra couple thousand a month, there.
Yeah, I'm reducing my expenses, which is like getting a raise.
Well, no, it's exactly the same thing. Or at age and at age 70, I'm waiting my Social Security
kicks in.
So I'm going to get maybe $3,000 a month, or let's call it $2,000 a month there. Social Security.
So you're expecting them to cut Social Security?
No. I was saying $3,000 a month. I was like between me and my wife. No, it wouldn't be that. But let's just say.
But yeah, you're gonna.
So I'm getting
your expenses. Technically, your cash flow changed by $5,000 a month at that point.
Yeah, at that point.
And so yes, and so what I like doing is when we're doing modeling, we're looking at the incomes when they come in, when they come out. The amount of money, the distribution rate today, to me, is not necessarily as important as the distribution rate 15 years from now, after everything's kicked in. Because if I'm 65, by the time I'm 80, everything's kind of kicked in. My income is either there or not there.
Yeah.
And my expenses, typically they've either gone away or they're going to continue for life. So we look at that modeling, and yes, we may be taking a 6 or 7% distribution, maybe even an 8% distribution now. But by the time all these other factors kick in, my Social Security goes up at age 70 or starts at age 70. My mortgage is paid off at age 74. By the time I'm 77, 78 years of age, what is my projected distribution rate at that point? Is it still 15% because I've drawn everything down so far?
Yeah.
Well, okay, that's a problem. Is it going, at that point, is it 6%? 5%? Remember, I'm 75, 76, 80 years old now.
Yeah.
If it's 5 or 6%, I'm still pretty good with that based on the assumptions. Now, obviously, I'm not going to assume that my overall portfolio is going to grow at an average 10% every year. And I'm going to so I've got to use conservative assumptions on the growth and how we're doing things. But in the modeling process, we're looking at it today. You may have a high distribution rate today, but after everything kicks in and or the expenses go down in the future, your expected distribution rate in the future is not as high. This also comes into whether you use lifetime income or not. I've seen people who retire at 62, 63 who don't want to turn on their Social Security until age 70. And the salesperson says, well, you need lifetime income to give you guaranteed income because you've got $3,000 a month of fixed expenses that you need to cover with guaranteed income. So they sell them a guaranteed income product right now. But then at age 70, their Social Security kicks in at $4,000 and they don't need the guaranteed income anymore. Yeah. And so now they didn't need to take that flexibility out of their portfolio. They didn't need that product the way that it was presented. I'm not saying that they may not have wanted it, but I'm just saying they didn't need it for the reason it was sold, which is why, unfortunately, annuities get a bad rap sometimes.
Well, because sometimes they deserve a bad rap. Or not the annuities, but the person selling them. Yeah.
So when you look at and you're modeling and you're doing your planning, it's not just planning for today. It's planning for today and in the future to see what's happening, what's different, what is expected, or what could we expect to change in the future. We're also not just planning today from a tax planning standpoint. We're planning today, yes, you're a married couple and you can have a little over $100,000 of gross income and stay in the 12% income tax bracket. So does that mean that, how do we allocate our incomes? Do we go one way or another with our IRAs? Because if something happens to one or the other spouse, that tax bracket now only goes to $50,000.
Yeah.
And so we've got to plan for today and plan for the future.
Well, you mentioned, before we wrap up here, you mentioned the importance of the withdrawal strategy.
Oh, yes.
And I said, well, what if you have your mortgage can be paid off in 7 years and your Social Security you're waiting until age 70, so that's 7 years from now, whatever. So your expenses are going to drop. However, it still doesn't mean so if I say, well, then so what? Can I take 10% out of my portfolio until that age? You might say, well, yes, but you still need the proper withdrawal strategy because I'll tell you what, if I had $1 million, I'm taking 100,000 out for the first 5 years, and the market drops for the first 2 years.
We had a 2022. Not only did you go down because you took 100,000 out, and you didn't get the growth that you expected, you had some takeaway. Now you're down to about $740,000 instead of only being at $950.
So then it wouldn't work.
No, that puts a lot of pressure on a portfolio.
Yeah, and you better hope you better hope for a miracle.
Do I have a rich uncle out there somewhere?
So is there a safe amount to take out? How much should you withdraw from your portfolio? To summarize would be 4%, 5% to start off with.
But then you layer in the complexities. And like anything else in financial planning, the answer is the same. What is the appropriate withdrawal rate? It depends. Depends on you, how you're structuring your financial life, where things are happening, how your longevity fits into this. Are you married, not married? Yeah, what's the age difference there? There are so many factors, and everybody is different.
Yeah, you shouldn't be doing this yourself, folks. I mean, you could get lucky and do okay, but for the most part,
$10 million,
well, it's hard to screw that up. But I've seen people mess that up,
especially lottery winners.
Oh man, do we need to get into that? If you need some help, you want to talk more about this kind of thing, withdrawal rates and all that, you can talk to any of the Lucia Capital Group advisors. 800-644-1150. 800-644-1150. Professor Rick Plum is the Chief Financial Planning Officer, so of course, Rick, you oversee all of them.
I'm here.
You're there, and you've got your hand in each one of these. Make use of Professor Plum through any of the Lucia Capital Group advisors. Also find us online, luciacap.com, luciacap.com. We have wonderful tools you can download, things you can look at, videos to check out, blog posts. It's all there, luciacap.com. Also find us on Spotify, Apple too. Not Apple too. Apple as well. I owned an Apple II. I owned an Apple II years ago.
Okay.
It was a 2E, I think, about 1981. Anyway, yes, you can find us there on Apple. What is it? You know how to find it. You found our podcast. Subscribe. Do that. Make sure you don't miss a single minute of all the wonderful things we've had to say. Go back and listen to all 127 episodes would be my other advice. You should binge listen to this program.
A friend of mine just did that. Not all 127, but he all the ones he'd missed out on. He caught up. He was on vacation for a little bit, and he
that's great.
Binged listened.
Well, it's great. I know somebody who's got a really long commute, and they listen. It's like an hour and a half a day, and
wow.
So that covers a good 1 or 2 episodes. So it's good stuff. Out of time, we will talk more about this, I'm sure. And my thanks to Professor Rick Plum. You're a CFP professional, are you not?
That's what they tell me. Yes, I am.
And that's why I've got you on this show. Again, if you need him, 800-644-1150 at Lucia Capital Group. For Professor Rick Plum, I'm your podcast host, Johnny Dean. We thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day. We'll talk to you again next week. The information provided should not be considered specific tax, legal, or investment advice and is not specific to any individual's personal circumstances. This material is gathered from sources believed to be reliable. However, its accuracy cannot be guaranteed. Different types of investments and/or investment strategies involve varying levels of risk, and there can be no assurance that any specific investment or investment strategy will be profitable for a client's or prospective client's portfolio. Thus, investments may result in a loss of principal. Accordingly, no client or prospective client should assume that the information presented serves as the receipt of or a substitute for personalized advice from Lucia Capital Group or from any other investment professional. You should always seek counsel of the appropriate advisor prior to making any investment decision. All investments are subject to risk, including the loss of principal. The information provided is based on current laws, which are subject to change at any time. Lucia Capital Group is not affiliated with or endorsed by the Social Security Administration or any government agency. Social Security rules can be complex. For more information about Social Security benefits, visit the SSA website at ssa.gov or call 800-772-1213 to speak with an SSA representative. Annuities are long-term investment products designed for retirement purposes. Guarantees are based on the claims-paying ability of the issuer, subject to their terms and conditions. Early withdrawals may be subject to surrender penalties, and if taken prior to age 59.5, may be subject to an additional 10% federal tax. Annuities are not FDIC insured. Certain terms and conditions apply, so please read insurance company materials carefully. Examples cited are hypothetical, are for illustrative purposes only, are not guaranteed, and subject to potential federal and state law amendments. There is no guarantee that you will achieve the results discussed or illustrated. A value averaging strategy does not guarantee a profit or protection from loss. The investor sets a target growth rate or amount on his or her asset base or portfolio each month, and then adjusts the next month's contribution according to the relative gain or shortfall made on the original asset base. Since such an investment plan involves continual investment in securities, you must consider your willingness to continue purchasing during periods of high or low price levels. IRA withdrawals will be taxed at ordinary income rates. Withdrawals prior to age 59.5 may also be subject to a 10% penalty tax. Rick Plum is a registered representative with, and security and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor and member FINRA SIPC. The investment professionals are affiliated with LPL Financial and are conducting business using the name Lucia Capital Group, a separate entity from LPL Financial.